It's time to buy double game week 25 players, but should we be avoiding Aston Villa players? And are we actually considering selling Alexander Isak? In today's video, we're going to cover all of that and much more. So as always, if you look forward to it, make sure you drop a like, even for 400 on this video. And if you haven't already, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Enough waffling, let's get into today's video. So first up, we have to talk about one of the hottest topics coming into double game week 25. Should we be selling one of the best assets in Alexander Isak to bring in a double game week player in the shape of Ollie Watkins? Well, hundreds of thousands of managers think so, because currently Isak is the 5th or 4th most sold player going into game week 25, and Ollie Watkins is in the top 10 most bought. So clearly managers are liking this move. And I want to give my own opinion on this situation. So why even are managers considering selling Alexander Isak? Well, the next 3 fixtures, you would argue, are difficult. Man City away, I know they are, of course, in a bad spot right now, but it's still Man City. Then they got Forest at home, followed by Liverpool away. And you'd even argue in game week 28, with Graham Potter in charge, they've been a bit better, West Ham. I think that could be a tricky game away. And then, of course, they blank in game week 29. However, we also need to remember that Ollie Watkins is one of those that blanks in game week 29. The big attraction for him, of course, is that he doubles in game week 25 at home against Ipswich and then that tricky game at home against Liverpool. But we also need to remember Aston Villa have only lost 1 game at home in the Premier League this season. So I think they are going to make it difficult for Liverpool. Now, of course, the problem right now of Ollie Watkins is that he is yellow flagged. We are hoping between now and the Friday deadline we'll get an update on him. And if we do get the information that he's pass fit and ready to go, I do think that is going to make even more managers sell Alexander Isak to bring in Ollie Watkins, in particular for that Ipswich game. However, I do want to heed a bit of warning about this transfer. Firstly, I think you are selling one of the best assets in the game in Alexander Isak. I think if you get rid of him, I just think you're going to want him straight back in the foreseeable future. Now, yes, you could avoid him for the next 6 game weeks, buy him back in a wildcard. That is absolutely a strategy that could be in place. However, Man City game is wedged between Man City's first and second leg against Real Madrid. This isn't going to be a Man City team firing all cylinders or fully focused on this Newcastle game, whereas Isak has had a complete rest coming on for 30 seconds in the FA Cup game. So he is going to be fit and raring to go. When we look at the underlying numbers here for both players, very, very similar. They're both talismanic figures in their respective teams. And for me, I just think it is a bit of a waste of a transfer getting rid of Alexander Isak to bring in someone like Ollie Watkins. Firstly, we need to get the confirmation that he is fit and firing. And secondly, when we look at the fixtures coming up, I actually think Chelsea at home in 26 isn't bad either. But Palace away in 27, Brentford away in 28, yes, could be okay. Then they blank, and then they got Brighton away in game week 30. I actually don't think the fixtures are fantastic after the Ipswich game. So really, you're bringing him in for a double, and the second part of the double is Liverpool. And do we foresee Aston Villa scoring bags of goals against them? I personally don't think so. The other consideration that you do need to remember is that January was a busy time for Aston Villa. They brought in Milan, who also played up top in their FA Cup game against Spurs. We got Marcus Rashford and we got Asensio in this attacking lineup. So if Watkins is slightly struggling, we could easily see limited minutes against Ipswich in preparation for the game against Liverpool. They have the resources available to them now. So in conclusion, if you're in a position where you want to buy Ollie Watkins and it's someone other than Alexander Isak, then yes, I can get on board it. But you need to make sure you get that information that he's fit before even considering it. If you're looking to sell Isak to bring in Ollie Watkins, of course do it if you think it's the right move. But for me, I just think you're selling one of the best players in the game with a really good fixture this week away against Man City to then inevitably want Isak back around game week 30 onwards. If you want to do that, absolutely, but for me, it isn't the right move. On the subject of Aston Villa players, I wanted to touch on the 3rd most bought player going into game week 25, which of course is going to be Morgan Rogers. Still at that amazing price point of 5.6 million, so still viable for pretty much every FPL manager out there, unless you are really scraping the barrel with your budget. And I really do think that this is an interesting player for a lot of managers, and maybe one that there are issues that other managers haven't considered. And I want to touch on the pros and cons, as well, of course, the fixtures for this player. So firstly, the pros, because there are many for Morgan Rogers. Firstly, he's just been a great option all season. I think some managers have found him quite frustrating at times where he's been really good on the eye but hasn't actually delivered. We've got to remember he started the season at 5 million, an incredible price point for a player. And I do think we need to always limit our expectations with someone like Morgan Rogers. However, what we cannot forget is that he has a double game week in game week 25. We've spoken about that, Ipswich and Liverpool. Now, of course, I've mentioned that Aston Villa have bolstered their attacking lineup this season in the January transfer window. But I don't think this is necessarily going to negatively impact Rodgers for minutes. I still think out of all the attackers, I would even put Ollie Watkins in the equation. He is going to be the most locked in for minutes. We've seen Unai Emery just completely play Rodgers to the ground each and every week. And I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon, especially with the performances that he's continuing to deliver even when he doesn't score or assist. So I think the minutes are the highest of all the players. In terms of the double, we've spoken about it. Ipswich game, great. Liverpool game, meh, not great. And also the numbers for Rodgers. As I said, limit your expectations, but 0.2 XG per 90, 0.22 expected assists per 90. They're fine numbers for a 5.6 million midfielder. Now, let's talk about the cons right now, because I think a lot of people are buying Rodgers, not necessarily thinking about the impact longer term. So I would argue, as I said, the fixtures are mixed. I think Palace away is not great. Brentford away is okay. Brighton away in 30s, it's meh. And of course, the blank in game week 29. So if you are looking to buy Morgan Rogers into your team, you need to remember that you are starting to push yourself maybe towards a free hit in game week 29, especially if you're selling a player who actually has a game in 29. A reminder, the teams that are blanking are Liverpool, Aston Villa, Crystal Palace and Newcastle. So if you buy Rodgers, you're just adding another player that blanks in game week 29. So just remember that in the back of your minds. And also, even though they have signed a lot of new players, and I don't think they will impact his minutes, I do think it could actually impact his positioning in the team. What we saw in the FA Cup game is once Asensio come on, we saw Rodgers actually drift out to the right-hand side and do a bit more of the defensive work when it was required. I do think Asensio is very much a luxury player. And if Unai Emery decides to actually integrate him into the team, it could actually have a bit of a negative impact on Rodgers in the offensive areas where he might have to do the doggy work to kind of back up Asensio. So I think we need to also remember that Rodgers' minutes isn't going to be affected, but maybe the positionings that he's taking up in the team at times. I still think Rodgers is their main man in the midfield. So all in all, I think Rodgers is a fantastic buy for game week 25. The double game week, Chelsea at home in 26, I also think is great. However, if you do buy him, then you need to remember you're buying a player that blanks in game week 29, which might force you towards a free hit in 29. And I can't sit here right now and tell you whether a free hit in 29 is good or bad for your teams. You need to take a look at how many blank players you currently have and whether Rodgers adds just another headache to it. Because I would argue you're only really bringing him in for that Ipswich game. I don't think there's going to be much joy in that Liverpool game personally. Now, currently the most sold player going into game week 25 is going to be Anthony Gordon, 7.6 million. So you can understand why managers are looking at him thinking, that's a nice price point to move off to other options. You can upgrade this to someone like a Brian Mbeumo if you wanted to, or you could downgrade to some of those cheaper options like a Morgan Rogers that we spoke about. So I just want to quickly touch on the pros and cons of Gordon for game week 25 and beyond. If you are one of those managers that owns him, I'm actually one of those right now, and it is a bit of a headache. So first, I just want to quickly cover off the reason why managers are actually looking to sell him, because he is yellow flagged on the game with a knock. We don't really know the extent of the injury. And I do want to caveat this by saying that the Friday is the deadline, and I honestly don't think we'll get anything from Eddie Howe. He is notorious in press conferences to be very, very coy about updates on players. I don't think we're going to get a concrete news on him. The only real hope that we have is maybe some sort of inside journalist gives us an update on Gordon that he is going to be past fit for the Man City game. Because what I want to do say is, and I've kind of covered this on the Isak section, is it's a good game week 25 fixture, and I put that in the pros section. It sounds a bit weird saying that with Man City, but what we see with Man City right now, a team that struggles in transitional areas. And I think Newcastle are actually better when they don't have the ball. So ball dominance for them means that they are a little bit less creative in the final third. We've seen that against some of the middling teams in the league. I think when they're up against the big teams, and their record kind of speaks for itself this season, they get themselves up for it. And players like Gordon against whoever plays at right back, Rico Lewis, Kanji, Mateus Nunes. I think there's going to be a lot of joy there. So it pains me to sit here and say that Gordon actually might need to be a sell for your team if he's going to be ruled out, as I do think there are going to be returns for him in this fixture, and his numbers speak for themselves. 0.41 expected goals per 90, fantastic. 0.21 expected assists per 90. He hasn't had those explosive game weeks, but the numbers have always been consistent, and his attacking returns have been consistent. So it pains me right now to sit here and say this, but I do think Anthony Gordon, if he is ruled out for the Man City game, or even if there is real doubt, I think selling him probably does make sense. Now, look, we've spoken about this a lot. Blank game week 29. We touched on it on the Aston Villa players. The same applies to the Newcastle players. And I would argue that the run-up to game week 29 isn't fantastic, similar to that of Aston Villa. Man City, Forest, Liverpool, West Ham. I know Newcastle get up for the big games, but do I foresee mega hauls for Anthony Gordon in any of those three fixtures coming up? Probably not. And that is the big thing that we need to consider. He could do well, but I don't see huge hauls to justify the 7.6 million price bracket. The one thing I will say is, game week 30 onwards, the fixtures are really, really good for Newcastle. So I think you'll want to jump back on Gordon. But I think there's enough right now with these fixtures to think Isak is perfectly fine to hold. Gordon, with the double up, probably can be expendable. And the problem is there are good, cheap alternatives available in the game. We'll touch on some of those in a minute, but we've already discussed on someone like a Morgan Rogers. The other thing we need to touch on is that the free hit in game week 29. If you own Gordon right now, you need to remember what direction you want to take your team. If you do Gordon to someone like a Morgan Rogers, then you are basically selling the same player for the exact same player. Blanks in game week 29, and that might force the free hit. But if you're in a position right now where you really don't want a free hit, selling Gordon this week, actually, to somebody like a Bournemouth midfielder, which we're going to touch on next, would actually resolve that issue for game week 29 because they play in that game week. So for me, I think if we get no concrete news is available, selling Gordon probably is the right move. It's too much money to keep in the team. But if we get positive news, I actually think he could deliver really well in this City game. Now, we've spoken about Anthony Gordon replacements at a cheaper price point being quite attractive. We touched on Morgan Rogers, but the Bournemouth midfielders are the ones that are getting a lot of attention right now. And most of these three and defenders are being bought in their masses going into game week 25. So we got Utara at 5.1 million, the cheapest, Semenyo at 5.7, and then Kluivert at 5.9 million. And we need to remind ourselves why, firstly, managers are buying Bournemouth assets. It's because of the fixtures long term. They got Southampton away in game week 25. Now, I'm going to caveat this by saying, I would not be surprised if this is the sort of game that Bournemouth slip up in. I know it's a bit controversial, but I feel like this could be one of those. But it is still a great fixture. Wolves at home in 26, perfectly fine. Brighton away in 27, could be a tricky game. Tottenham away in 28, if Ange is still charged and then players are still putting in these performances, a good fixture. And then importantly, they play in blank game week 29. So if you're selling Gordon, selling all these sort of players at blank, these players absolutely solve a headache for you in 29. And I think that's a good fixture for goals against Brentford. And then on the other side, game week 30 of the blank, they have Ipswich at home. So long term, the fixtures are fantastic. And I think you actually could just play them in any given fixture that you want to over this period. Now, when we take a look at the numbers for the players, we've got Utara at top at XG per 90 at 0.56, which is really, really solid. Kluivert at 0.55, but remember, penalties are taken into the equation. When we take those out, his open play XG is more around 0.25, so not at the same level as that of Utara and Semenyo. And Semenyo at 0.47 per 90 minutes. Now, currently we're seeing Utara play as a bit more of a 9, and Semenyo playing in his left-hand side or right. Kluivert, again, either side of the wings. The big factor that we need to remember with all these three options is they all have something slightly different amongst themselves. So Utara playing very much almost as a 9, which is fantastic. But I would argue that long-term, the one that could be expendable in terms of minutes. So I think you're paying the cheapest price, but you're also paying for the highest risk as an option. The numbers are great when he's on the field, but could I also see diminished minutes as players return? I probably could, which is not ideal. Semenyo, I think, is fantastic for guaranteed minutes. He plays all across the front line. His numbers are great, but his output is a little bit underwhelming at times. And I think Kluivert at 5.9 million kind of justifies the price point because he's on penalties, his numbers are really good. Yes, the open play XG isn't at the same level, but I think he is playing fantastic right now, and he kind of is the form horse that a lot of managers want to jump on. Now, in terms of who I would buy for game week 25, I think Ouattara is still fantastic, but I would just be a little bit concerned at times that if he does have a slight drop off, they might find alternatives in that front line. But as of right now, I think Ouattara for the next 4 game weeks is brilliant. If I had to rank these, I still think Kluivert would be number 1 because he's on penalties, and the price between him and Semenyo is very, very close. I would then put Semenyo second and Ouattara third in this case. But if you are happy to take not a punt on Ouattara, but long-term risk on minutes, then I think he is fantastic for that value at 5.1 million. The only caveat we need to put out there is Kluivert is expecting a baby. Could we see that impact a game? Maybe, but I don't want to throw that in here as a reason to avoid him. So Bournemouth, all in all, fantastic buys for game week 25, and I even think you could double up on them in your teams from 25 onwards, and it will still be a great investment. You're basically paying 11 million for 2 options. That's fantastic value. So finally, I wanted to end this in a little bit of a weird way, talking about managers, because of course the assistant manager chip was activated by a lot of people in game week 24, and game week 25, it looks like some managers are activating it as well. Reminder, the chip lasts for 3 consecutive game weeks, so you still got 2 more if you activated it in double game week 24. And what I want to do here is give you a bit of a keep, sell, and avoid sort of section for the managers. So I think it's really relevant with the way that this chip is played out. So a reminder, Moyes was popular in game week 24. And if you activated it on him, I think selling him is going to be the right move. We'll touch on that in a minute. Unai Emery is now under consideration because, of course, they double in game week 25. And Slot, once again, has a double game week in 25. So firstly, if you're looking for an assistant manager in 25, I think it has to be one of Slot or Unai Emery. With this chip, the double game weeks are just way too powerful. It makes no sense to put it on a manager that has one single game week. When we look at the fixtures in isolation, Aston Villa at home against Ipswich, but then importantly at home against Liverpool. That is going to give you a table bonus opportunity. All it takes is Aston Villa to draw against Liverpool. That will give you 3 points for the draw, 5 additional table bonus draw points. So 8 in total, which is fantastic. Instead, with Arne Slot, we of course have just got generic games. Wolves at home, brilliant for the actual win. Aston Villa away, I understand why managers are a little bit worried about that game. It could be a bit of a banana skin, but I still think Slot is a fantastic pick for your team. So what would I do in this situation? Well, hopefully I've covered it all off here. If you already have Slot in double game week 24 as your assistant manager, just chill. Keep him as your manager. There is no point using one of your precious free transfers to sell him to someone like Unai Emery. We got injury doubts about Trent. If there is an attacker that you really want to go there, you can. I just don't think there's enough of appeal to go Slot to another Liverpool outfield player. It requires 2 transfers and it makes no sense. Keep those pressure transfers and reassess in game week 26, as I think you'll want to sell Slot for someone else in that game week, maybe someone like an Arteta. Now, if you owned Moyes in double game week 24, then it's time to move away. The problem is you are going to need a bit of cash in the bank to get to either to Unai Emery or Arne Slot. Now, as I mentioned here, if you've already got triple Liverpool outfield, and I imagine you do, if you activated the assistant managership on Moyes in double game week 24, I assume you already have triple Liverpool. If that's the case, I would just go to Unai Emery. We've spoken about Aston Villa in detail in this video. Morgan Rogers is probably the best pick. Outside of that, I don't think there are any. And what I love about Unai Emery is you get him for double game week 25, you get the table bonus opportunity, and then he's gone after that. Whereas if you buy Aston Villa outfield players, the fixtures after are very, very middling. Unai Emery serves you for the one game week that you actually want those Aston Villa players. If you don't have triple Liverpool, then I do think Arne Slot is interesting, but of course you need 1 million in the bank in order to get there. I still think I'd fancy the Unai Emery punt, to be honest with you. Finally, if you are activating the assistant manager chip in double game week 25 for the first time, if you only own 2 Liverpool, and I think that's going to be quite popular this week because Trent could be a doubt, Salah, and might be in a position where you sold somebody else. I would personally probably then buy Slot in that case. I'll get him in because triple Liverpool is going to be popular regardless whether you have a manager plus 2 or 3 outfield players. However, if you have 3 Liverpool, as we already discussed, then I would play on Unai Emery and chase the upside. So if you have Moyes, you sell. If you have Arne Slot, you keep. And if you don't have either and you're looking to be a bit more fancy and go for the table bonus, then I would buy Unai Emery. That is the way that it works in this. Let me know what your assistant manager chip strategy is in the comment section. Yes guys, okay, that is going to cover off today's double game week 25 buy, sell and avoid players video. I know I've missed some, so please let me know in the comment section. If I have, I will try and cover those off in a bit more detail in the comment section. If you enjoyed it, please do consider dropping a like and smashing that subscribe button for daily fantasy content. Remember, it's a Friday deadline, so hit that notification bell so you know when I am going live. Have a great day guys, take care and I'll see you real soon. Cheers.